And this is the 5-Minute Podcast Review for Saturday, March 31st, 2018. And here are the 5 podcasts for this episode, remembering that if any catch your interest, you'll find links to them right on your phone screen. The first is called Chompers, and it's a new concept for podcasting. Chompers is aimed at kids, though that's not a totally new concept in podcasting. There's quite a few podcasts for kids already out there. What's interesting is that Chompers has been developed specifically to get kids cleaning their teeth twice a day and doing it thoroughly for the full 2 minutes that many dentists recommend. Now, maybe before I go on, let's just hear a quick sample of how Chompers works.
Good morning. It's time for Chompers, your morning and night toothbrushing show. Get ready to brush your teeth because today we're investigating incredible animals. It's Animal Week on Chompers. Are you ready to brush? Start brushing on the top of your mouth. Pick a side and make sure to brush the entire tooth. Count down with me. 3, 2, 1, brush! Today on Chompers, our mission is to find out which animal has the most teeth. Is it A, a snail, B, a shark, or C, a saber-toothed tiger? But before you make your guess, let's learn a little bit about these animals and switch to the other side of the top of your mouth. Make circles with your brush over each tooth. Did you know that
Okay, so that gives you an idea of how Chompers works. Full episodes are around 3 minutes long, each based around a different story, joke, fun fact or song, and they drop twice a day, obviously for morning and evening brushing. The other key thing to mention about Chompers is that it was primarily developed to be an Amazon Alexa skill. So if you have an Amazon Echo in the bathroom, the kids just need to say, "Alexa, start Chompers," to get the latest episode of the Chompers podcast running and them brushing their teeth. So something to think about if you've got kids, but actually I'm reading reports that a lot of adults are also finding Chompers pretty good at motivating them to do their full 2 minutes brushing routine also. So that's Chompers. Remember, it's best used as an Alexa skill, but it works fine as a regular podcast also. Next podcast is Sound Tracking with Edith Bowman. And what we've got here is a nicely produced weekly podcast out of the UK where each episode talks to a film director, actor, producer or composer about the music they've used in their films. The host, Edith Bowman, is a writer and broadcaster with years of experience talking to people in the music, film and TV industries, and this intersection of music and film is obviously something Edith is passionate about. Of course, music plays a big role in the way we feel about films and can operate at both a conscious and subconscious level, so it's genuinely interesting to hear firsthand the thinking that went into the soundtracks, especially the soundtracks of films you've seen. And with over 80 episodes of soundtracking up now, a wide range of films have been covered, including recent episodes on the music used in Tomb Raider, Lion and Black Panther. You can check out the full episode and film list for Soundtracking with Edith Bowman wherever you get your podcasts, or just use the link I've put on your screen. Moving on to a quick chat about The Grind podcast. It's a podcast with a mission to help young people, college students and new graduates navigate the tricky task of landing a job. The episodes so far have looked at common issues through the eyes of 4 real-live students, checking in on them across the episodes to see how they're managing and to workshop the challenges they're facing, such as how to network, dealing with self-doubt, tactics for applying for a job, handling job interviews, and even just advice on taking care of yourself through the job search process. The host of The Grind was a management consultant with the Boston Consulting Group and more recently has been working as an educator and mentor to students from low-income communities, and it's the challenges facing these students that particularly inspires The Grind. Mark, the host, describes the job market as, quote, a hazy and uneven playing field designed to give some kids a leg up and lock others out. The Grind podcast is all about helping graduates who fall into that others category and help them turn the tables on this situation. Basically, and you'll know this already if you're in the graduate job hunting field, it's a lonely and intimidating place, particularly if you're starting from a non-privileged position. So the Grind podcast is all about making the process just a bit less lonely and intimidating. Okay, I'm going to finish up with 2 tech/internet-related podcasts. The first is Unchained, and Unchained won't be a podcast for everyone, but it's probably a podcast about something that will affect everyone, and that's the blockchain and the closely related subject of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. Forbes journalist Laura Shin hosts Unchained and does a great job as the intermediary between a range of expert guests and us, the less informed listeners. Like many, I'm certainly familiar with the term Bitcoin and also blockchain, but I really didn't have much of a clue about either. For me, the test of that was my ability or lack of ability to explain either blockchain or Bitcoin to someone else. Now, having immersed myself in a few episodes of Unchained, I now reckon I could have a fair crack at explaining both concepts and their relevance to each other. I'm not going to try that here, but what I would suggest is that as a starting point, you check out the episode called How to Explain Cryptocurrencies and Blockchains to the Average Person. The episodes aren't numbered, but I've put a link to this specific episode on your screen, and I think it's a good starter episode to determine if Unchained is a podcast for you or not. Definitely give at least the How to Explain episode a go, because I feel, having listened to a few episodes of Unchained, that the point we're at with the blockchain might be a bit like listening to a podcast back in the early 80s, if podcasts actually existed then, on this thing called the internet, and hearing the experts at the time try to explain what it was, how big it might become, and the kinds of things that it could be used for. In other words, listening in on Unchained is probably listening in at the beginnings of something big. So that's Unchained, and speaking of the early days of the internet, leads us nicely to the last podcast for this episode, called the Internet History Podcast. Now, if this sound means much to you, then there's a good chance you'll be interested in the Internet History Podcast. Okay, so the Internet History Podcast is a project that's aiming to create an oral history of the internet through hundreds of interviews with the people that actually made it happen. If you were there at the time of the dial-up modem and attempting to use the early internet, then the Internet History Podcast is going to be a pretty nostalgic walk down memory lane. Names like Mosaic, Lycos, Netscape, CompuServe, AltaVista and Napster are all over the early episodes, along with interviews with the creators and others behind these names, and the fascinating insider stories they have to tell. This, of course, is years before Google or Facebook were even heard of. More recent episodes are dealing with the evolution of broadband, the rise of Amazon, Google and Facebook by this time, of course, and even podcasting. Probably you should listen to the Internet History Podcast chronologically from episode 1, but as you scroll the episode list, there are so many subjects that, at least if you're a bit of a nerd like me, you want to listen to right away. Episode 73, an interview with Karl-Heinz Brandenburg, known as the father of the MP3, is just one example. The story of how the MP3, which is the format for just about all online audio, music, podcasts, this is an MP3 you're listening to right now, the story of how the MP3 came about is extraordinary, including huge doses of luck. Just for example, and I'm telling the short version of the story here, but MP3 was so named because it was the third choice in a competition between rival organisations competing to develop a standard compressed audio format. So MP1 was the leading option, with MP2 following and MP3 third. But users assumed MP3 was actually the best option, as if it was the most recent third generation of the MPEG format, which of course makes sense. That's how the software upgrade numbering convention typically works. Anyhow, I'm getting carried away. Obviously, I'm into the Internet History Podcast. I'll stick a link to that specific MP3 episode on your screen, as well as a link for the main Internet History Podcast feed. And so that's about it for this episode. A quick reminder, we checked out Chompers, Soundtracking with Edith Bowman, The Grind Podcast, Unchained, and the Internet History Podcast. Again, all links are on your screen. And just before I go, I have a favour to ask. It's not about rating and reviewing on iTunes, though feel free to do that. It's more about just directly helping to spread the word about this podcast. Now, if you know someone, anyone who's into podcasts, maybe just getting into podcasts, or maybe a regular podcast listener, please let them know about this podcast, the 5-Minute Podcast Review. All of us are interested in finding new podcasts to listen to, and this podcast is slowly becoming the best pool of podcast recommendations on the internet. There's dozens of past episodes and hundreds of podcasts reviewed, covering a wide range of listening interests. So please help me spread the word, maybe even post a link on your Facebook feed or Twitter, whatever. Anything you can do to help spread the word will be a real favour to me. So thanks in advance, catch you in the next episode, and thanks for listening.